Hey there, welcome to part 8 of the Rhythmic Building Blocks series, focusing on rhythmic understanding, especially for guitar players, but for all musicians as well. Today we're expanding on the ideas that we've talked about thus far. Last time we talked about the concept of rhythmic modes, taking one rhythm and shifting it around the measure to get a set of 16 different rhythms. And then we made a few little song ideas based on the rhythmic modes of the Charleston rhythm. Now that we have the general concept, let's do something a little bit harder. Let's bring back the funk clave pattern that we talked about before. We're gonna do the same thing that we did to the Charleston, now to this pattern, shifting it 1/16th note later to get the next rhythmic mode, and then doing that over and over again. You can see that almost right away the pattern starts to fall off the end of the measure, and whenever that happens, we just take that note and put it at the beginning of the measure. So we just keep shifting it over and over again until we get all 16 different rhythmic modes of the original rhythm. So let's practice this a bit. Like we did before, we're going to use a simple drum beat and a bass note on beat 1 just to help us keep track of where we are in the measure. And I've decided to switch to a new drum and bass sound and use this 2-chord minor vamp, which I feel better reflects the darkness of our times. Okay, so here's our guitar chords. We're gonna do an E minor 7 and an A minor. And for both of these, I'm just gonna use only the top 3 notes of each chord. And I'll be using some of my other fingers just to mute the rest of the strings so that I can just strum freely. Also, I forgot to mention we're gonna add in all the 16th notes as ghost notes in between all of our real notes, which I'll be playing by just strumming non-stop and muting all of the strings with my left hand to get the ghost notes. Of course, if you're not playing the guitar, you won't necessarily want to or be able to play the ghost notes, but depending on your instrument, you can try to do something like that or just keep it in mind because having the subdivision going is really helpful. Okay, so starting with the first one, this is just the normal funk clave. So now let's do number 2. We're shifting everything over 1/16th note. So now instead of our first note starting on beat 1, our first note's going to be on the 16th note just after beat 1. Now moving on to number 3. Once again, we shift everything over 1/16th note. And now our first note happens right on the upbeat of beat 1. Now on to number 4. Now our first note doesn't happen until the last 16th note of beat 1, so we'll have 3 ghost notes before we play our first real note. Okay, number 5. This is the first time we carry a note from the end back to the beginning of the measure, so our first note is right on beat 1 again, but then we wait until beat 2 to play our second note. So that's the process. You can go through all of these, you can just pick one or a few to start with, it's really up to you. Some tips for doing this. First of all, if you're a guitar player, every time you move to the next rhythm, you're going to make all of your down strums up strums and all of your up strums down strums. The same thing is true if you're a drummer or a percussionist, in that your lefts become rights and your rights become lefts. If you aren't a drummer or a guitar player, that means you can read music, so just read the music. The second tip is to focus on which notes land right on the downbeats. Then at least you have some strong pillars to base the rest of the rhythm around. And a last tip, specifically for this rhythm, is that every one of your notes is going to be 3/16th notes away from the previous note, except for one, which is 4/16th notes away. So you can just sort of find the part of the measure where the largest pause is and kind of use that as a marker. So that's the general idea. Now it's your turn to practice this stuff on your own. Write it out, clap it, tap it, sing it, play it on your instrument, and maybe most importantly of all, listen for these rhythms in recordings. Which brings us to... So as one very astute commenter noted on part 5 of this series, the funk clave could be considered a mode of the bossa nova clave. Number 11 on this list is sometimes called the bossa nova 3-2 clave, and then number 3 is the same thing but reversed, the bossa nova 2-3 clave. I could just as easily have used either of those as the starting point, and you would still get the same 16 patterns. A quick side note about the bossa nova clave, it's usually written like this, with 8th notes instead of 16th notes, but it's the same thing. They're called 3-2 or 2-3 because that refers to the number of notes in each measure. So as you would expect, you can hear this rhythm played in a lot of bossa nova music, often played by the drummer as acrostic on the snare.
Love is the saddest thing when it goes away.
Although, to be honest, trying to find a lot of examples of this without a massive amount of variation is pretty elusive. Bossa nova as a style is very much influenced by jazz, and it's pretty much all about rhythmic freedom. That's in stark contrast to Afro-Cuban music and the way in which it treats a clave, which is a lot more structured. In bossa nova, that skeleton rhythm can be implied, but it's actually not that cool to play the same rhythm over and over again. One place you can hear a lot of these rhythmic modes is in funk, disco, and dance music. Remember that we talked about how there's a lot of James Brown songs that are based on the number 1 pattern here. You can find lots of examples of the other modes too. Here's a great example of number 3 on Daft Punk's Get Lucky.
Like the legend of the Phoenix.
That's Nile Rodgers playing guitar on that track, one of the co-founders of the disco group Chic and one of the biggest figures in funk guitar. This whole album, Random Access Memories, is a deliberate throwback to the origins of dance music, so it kind of makes sense that the single would be a textbook example of disco funky guitar kind of playing. Here's another example of Nile Rodgers back in the 70s playing another one of these modes. In fact, these rhythms can be found in all kinds of dance music. Even... oh no. Not that. Anyway, one very important thing to note is that people tend to play little pieces of one of these rhythms and not so much the entire thing every time. A big reason for that is a concept called call and response, which is a subject that we're going to get into a lot more in the next video, but suffice it to say that as long as you're playing with other musicians, it usually helps to leave some space for them to play something too. I'm not trying to imply that this is something that by any means you need to memorize or treat as some kind of handbook of rhythms.
Bro, nice use of the 7th mode of the funk clave.
Weirdo. The main point is, here's a big list of probably really cool rhythms that you've never thought to play and or can't play. We're trying to build up our flexibility so that we can play any rhythm that we hear in our head. Like most things in music, ultimately it's better to rely on your ears and your intuition when you're doing something creative, even though when you're practicing you have to do it in a structured way to get better. I started practicing this stuff because at some point I just felt like I was kind of guessing at what rhythms to play in bands. Like I had some default things that I would tend to play, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. The key is to pay attention to how our rhythms are interacting with the other musicians we're playing with. For example, let's go back to the vamp we were practicing over before, but let's put a bass line in there now. It's no longer a blank slate, there's some rhythm happening, which will affect how our rhythm fits in. Most prominently, we've got an accent on the 16th note just before beat 3. So let's try a few of these modes. Here's the first one. With this rhythm, we hit beats 1 and 4 together with the bass, but we aren't together on that prominent accent in the middle of the measure. This could make things a little muddy depending on what else is happening in the song. Let's jump to number 5. This is definitely a strong choice. We hit beat 1 and that main accent in the middle of the measure with the bass. Let's try another. Let's do number 3. This one doesn't hit at all with the bass, which makes it a risky choice, but I actually like it. This is an example of purposefully playing in between another instrument's rhythm, which can be really effective. It just depends on what the song is trying to convey at this moment. Is this a verse where the focus should be on the melody, or is this a band breakdown where playing something extra funky is exactly what you want? So that's sort of like a slow motion practice room version of what I might do on the spot more intuitively on the bandstand. But the overall idea is the same. We're trying to find rhythms that support the music, drive it forward without getting in the way of the other instruments. Okay, before I leave you, let's try this same technique real quick on a totally different rhythm. The beauty of a strong rhythmic pattern is that when you shift it around, it stays just as strong because the space between the notes stays the same. So let's see how that holds up on another rhythm. Let's go all the way back to part 2 of this series where we learned the guitar intro to Stevie Wonder's For Once in My Life. It's a cool rhythm. I wonder what would happen if we shifted it over 1/16th note. You know, there's no shame in just literally writing this out on a piece of paper in whatever way you want. I'll draw out arrows, I'll use my fingers, anything at all to get the rhythm in my ears. Of course, ideally, it would be great to be able to shift this rhythm on the spot purely by ear. Sometimes I can do that, sometimes I can't. It's just a muscle that you have to build and develop. It sounds totally different. So just for fun, I'm gonna take this rhythm and see if I can change the key, change the tempo and some things and kind of like make a new sort of song idea out of it, just to take it completely away from the original. So I'm starting off by making this drum beat, which I think will complement our rhythm well. And now this is going to be the melody, which will use our newly discovered rhythm. Now I'm just messing around with some thick synths and adding chords and all of that fun stuff. This is the rhythm by itself with the metronome. Which is the same as the da 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 from Stevie Wonder, just 1/16th note later. General vibe is darker because that's just where we are right now. And I've put these drums on it which kind of like start on the downbeat, but then from then on, every measure they anticipate with a kick drum right before beat 1. And then together it's 1. Okay, so those are some more examples of using this rhythmic modes concept on a much more complicated type of pattern. If you're feeling like it's sort of getting crazy, then don't worry about it. It's not weird at all if this seems like very difficult. Just take it slowly, go back to some of the other videos, practice it. You will eventually get to this point in the video where it makes more sense to you. But overall, I hope that you see that this technique has some potential and hope you get something out of it. And please feel free to share your thoughts with me, post comments about what you're working on and, you know, anything else about this stuff. As I said before, the next video in this series is going to be about the concept of call and response and how that works with all this stuff. And I'm really excited about that one. I'm thinking I want to focus on making more videos like the Guitar is Hard video, sort of more conceptual style, and then maybe some other weird ones like the cookies video, and definitely some more pedal exploration videos. So if you're new here, please subscribe so that you don't miss any of those. I'm still very new and very small, and I could really use your help growing. So please feel free to share this video with anyone you think might be interested, musicians, etc. Also, if you'd like to support me directly and get access to a bunch of cool videos I make every week on different subjects, from guitar to improvising to making videos, you can check out my Patreon page and join up there. And that's it. I hope everyone's doing good out there and registered to vote. Okay, bye.